Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling surveys and how they handle, well, something really complex,
Yeah, something complex.
like gender and sexual orientation.
You'd think.
It's not exactly
Yeah.
like there's a simple answer, right? Just check a box. But it's a
Right.
lot deeper than that.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, on the one hand, you have this desire for people to see themselves reflected
Right.
in the data, to be counted.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, there's this wariness
Yes.
of being categorized,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about sensitive topics like this.
Totally. And it's not like these are
Right.
fixed or unchanging things. Right. I mean, language evolves. Understanding changes.
Absolutely.
How do you design a survey that keeps up with all of that?
Yeah. That's where the Pew Research Center comes in.
Mm-hmm.
I think their work gives us some really interesting insights into how these questions have changed over time.
Welcome to Gender Decoded, when numbers align, seeing the stories that data defines, breaking the barriers, truth untold, insights in gender, the data falls.
Today, we're going behind the scenes with a report from Name of Organization.
Okay.
They are experts in survey research, and they're shedding light on all the challenges and, get this, innovations happening in this field.
Motivations. In surveys, I'm intrigued.
Yeah,
But first, surveys love their categories.
they do.
Like they're neat little boxes to tick.
Yeah.
But when it comes to something as personal as gender and sexual orientation,
Right.
those boxes can feel pretty limiting.
They can feel very limiting. You
Yeah.
hit the nail on the head. That's the core tension that this report really explores.
Yep.
Surveys need categories for the data analysis. But we as individuals, we resist being pigeonholed.
Yeah.
So how do researchers kind of strike that balance?
Right.
Well, the report highlights some fascinating strategies.
Okay.
So, for instance, just tweaking the wording can drastically change how people respond.
Really? Okay, give me an example.
They found that simply changing how they asked about gender
Okay.
led to a significant increase in people choosing options outside the traditional male or female,
Interesting.
which just shows you how language can really be powerful in shaping those responses.
Yeah.
And that's just one little example.
Okay, I'm officially hooked now.
Good.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's get into it.
I'm thinking back to the old days.
Yeah.
And I remember, surveys, they would just assume your gender
Right.
or just give you a simple male or female choice.
Exactly. It wasn't too long ago that those were like the standard questions.
Right.
But the report, what it does is it highlights some of these key turning points
Okay.
in how we even think about gender and sexuality, which in turn influenced how these surveys have adapted.
Interesting.
For example, Dr. Alfred Kinsey's work in the mid-20th century, focusing on sexual behavior, that really challenged those old assumptions.
Okay.
And then you have the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s
Right.
that pushed researchers to ask very direct questions about sexual orientation and behavior,
Because it was
recognizing the connection to public health.
a public health issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've moved away from making assumptions
Yeah.
to using more inclusive language,
Yes.
offering more options.
Uh-huh.
It's progress.
It is.
But I imagine new challenges pop up
Totally.
when you're trying to measure something as fluid and personal as gender and sexual orientation.
Exactly. And the report doesn't shy away from those challenges.
Good.
It highlights the fear of discrimination and social stigma,
Yeah.
especially for LGBTQ plus individuals.
Right.
If a survey isn't confidential,
Right.
or if there's a live interviewer involved.
Mhm.
People might not be comfortable disclosing their true identities.
Right.
And that fear can really skew the data.
For sure. Yeah. I would never reveal something deeply personal if I didn't think it was safe.
Right.
And then you have the whole issue of language, which is
My God.
constantly evolving,
Right.
especially when it comes to gender and sexuality.
It seems like every day there's a new term.
Yeah.
So the report cites a 2022 survey
Okay.
where a significant portion of Americans admitted they had never heard of terms like non-binary or gender fluid.
Right.
So researchers are faced with this constant dilemma. How do you use language that's both inclusive and widely understood?
Right. So it's a tough balancing act.
It is.
Too many options could be confusing,
Yeah,
but too few options, you're going to risk excluding people.
you got it.
So what's the solution?
Well, name of organization, they had a really kind of clever approach.
Okay.
They tested different wording, and they found that simply asking, do you describe yourself as a man, a woman, or in some other way,
Okay.
was surprisingly effective.
Interesting.
It avoids the potentially unfamiliar terminology,
Yeah.
but it still creates space for those who don't identify with the traditional binary.
Right. Right. It seems so simple,
It does.
but clearly a lot of thought went into it.
A lot of thought.
But even with the most carefully crafted questions,
Right.
capturing these complex identities with a single question is still a challenge.
It is. You're exactly right.
Right.
And that's where this crucial distinction between sex and gender comes in.
Okay.
The report goes to great lengths to define these terms clearly.
Yeah.
Sex, as researchers use it, refers to biological characteristics,
Right.
things like chromosomes, reproductive organs.
Mm-hmm.
Gender, on the other hand, is about internal identity,
Okay.
how a person sees themselves.
Right.
And this distinction is super essential when we start talking about transgender and non-binary identities.
Okay, so those are identities that often get overlooked
They do.
or misunderstood in mainstream surveys.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So how does a report recommend we approach these identities?
They stress that transgender and non-binary folks
Okay.
often require more specialized research
Okay.
with larger sample sizes
Got it.
to ensure they're accurately represented.
So just adding a transgender option to a gender question
Yeah,
isn't enough.
it's not quite enough.
Okay.
The report cautions against that approach
Okay.
because it oversimplifies the spectrum of transgender experiences.
Got it. So
What's the gold standard then?
the gold standard. They recommend asking separate questions
Okay.
about sex assigned at birth
Uh-huh.
and gender identity.
Okay.
This allows individuals to express their identity more accurately
Gotcha.
and provides researchers with more nuanced data.
Wow. We're really starting to see how layered this whole issue is.
We are
And we haven't even delved into sexual orientation yet.
not yet. And I'm already mind blown by all these insights.
There's more to come.
Wow.
So
I'm
buckle up.
ready.
We'll dive into the nuances of sexual orientation in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back.
Before the break, we were unraveling how surveys approach gender.
Yeah.
Now let's turn to sexual orientation,
Okay.
which I imagine has its own set of complexity.
Oh, absolutely it does.
So what does the report say about how researchers tackle this task of measuring sexual orientation?
Well, first off, they point out that sexual orientation is not just a simple yes or no question.
Right.
It's multifaceted.
Okay.
So researchers, they often consider these 3 key dimensions:
Okay.
identity, behavior, and attraction.
So someone's sexual identity might not always align with their behavior
Exactly.
or who they're attracted to.
Yeah. Think of it like this. You might identify as straight,
Yeah, okay.
but find yourself attracted to someone of the same gender
Okay.
or engage in same-sex behavior at some point in your life.
Interesting.
These 3 aspects
Yeah.
don't always fit neatly into a box.
Right. It's a reminder that human experiences
Yes.
are rarely straightforward.
Rarely.
So how do researchers even begin to capture this complexity in a survey setting?
Well, a lot of times they'll focus on sexual identity
Okay.
because it's kind of the easiest to measure with a direct question.
Yeah.
You ask someone, do you consider yourself?
Right.
And then you list common identities like gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight,
Right.
and so on.
But if those categories don't always reflect the full picture,
Right.
doesn't that limit the data?
Yeah, you're sharp. That's precisely the limitation that the report acknowledges.
Okay.
Relying solely on identity labels
Right.
doesn't capture the full spectrum of human sexuality.
Right. And plus, as we discussed with gender,
Yes.
the language we use for sexual orientation is evolving too.
It is. Yeah, it's constantly changing.
Like so many people are adopting terms
Right.
beyond those traditional categories.
Yeah.
And some people reject labels altogether.
Absolutely. So researchers are constantly refining their methods and language to be as inclusive and relevant as possible.
So how do they do that?
Well, the report offers a really interesting example of this.
Okay.
Instead of using the term heterosexual,
Okay.
which could be unfamiliar to some,
Yeah.
they use this phrase straight, that is not gay or lesbian.
Got it.
So sometimes you have to sacrifice a bit of elegance for the sake of clarity.
Right. And I imagine translating these concepts into other languages presents a whole new set of challenges.
It does. It's another layer of complexity they highlight.
Okay.
For instance, they talk about translating the sexual orientation question into Spanish, where finding direct equivalents for straight or gay isn't always straightforward.
Wow. It makes you realize
It does.
how much cultural context plays into these seemingly simple survey questions.
It really does.
So with all these challenges and evolving nuances, what does this mean for the future of research on sexual orientation?
Well, the report really emphasizes the need to continuously evolve survey methodologies.
So we have to be creative.
You do.
And adaptable in our approaches.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
Yeah.
How do you measure something that's constantly in motion?
Right. It's a tough task.
Yeah.
No doubt.
And it's also essential to remember that research doesn't happen in a vacuum.
That's true.
It's influenced by the social and political climate.
Absolutely.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Certain social or political climates
Right.
might make people less likely to disclose their true identities,
Exactly.
even if a survey is anonymous.
You got it. That's something the report touches on as well.
Okay.
It really underscores that while progress has been made in recognizing and respecting diverse sexual orientations, there's always that potential for setbacks.
Right. So researchers have to be extra mindful of those external factors
They do.
and how they might influence people's willingness to participate, honestly,
Yeah.
in these surveys about such personal topics.
That's exactly right. And this brings us to a crucial point.
Right.
Understanding how these questions are asked
Right.
and how those external factors might be influencing responses
Yeah.
is essential for anyone who encounters survey data
Okay.
about gender and sexual orientation.
Especially because we see these statistics
We do. They're everywhere.
all the time in the news, on social media.
At work, yeah.
Yeah.
But how often do we stop and consider what's behind those numbers?
Right, because knowing what we now know about how these identities are measured can dramatically change how we interpret those findings.
It can.
It's like having this secret decoder ring for understanding data.
That's a great analogy.
So you might see a headline proclaiming that a certain percentage of the population identifies as LGBTQ plus
Right.
on the surface.
Yeah.
It seems like a simple fact, but we've learned that this number really depends heavily
It does.
on how the question was asked,
Yeah.
the language used,
The language?
even the broader social and political context
Absolutely.
in which the survey was conducted.
Yeah.
So even a seemingly small change in wording or context
Right.
could have this huge ripple effect
It could, yeah.
on the results.
Yeah.
So this is where critical thinking comes in.
It does.
The report encourages us to ask questions about the surveys we encounter.
Yes.
Who conducted the survey?
Yeah.
What were the specific questions asked?
Right.
Was the sample size large enough?
Absolutely.
Was it diverse enough
Yes.
to be truly representative?
Yes.
It's like being a detective looking for clues
Is.
to understand the bigger picture.
Exactly.
And sometimes even seemingly reputable sources
Yes.
can misinterpret or misrepresent survey data,
Unfortunately. Yeah.
whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Right.
So we can't just take things at face value. We have to dig deeper, understand the methodology,
Yeah.
consider potential biases.
Absolutely.
And this is especially crucial when it comes to sensitive topics
It is.
like gender and sexual orientation,
Yeah.
where even subtle inaccuracies can have these real-world impacts
Exactly.
on individuals and communities.
Yeah. It's about making sure
Right.
that that data is used responsibly
Yeah,
and that everyone is accurately represented.
for sure.
So-
And the report actually ends
Yes.
on a somewhat hopeful note.
It does.
It points to this increasing inclusion of LGBTQ plus data
Yeah.
in federal surveys.
Which is a positive sign.
It is encouraging.
Yes.
You know, it means that we are moving towards a
Uh,
more inclusive and accurate
Yeah.
understanding of the population.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But the work is far from over.
Yeah.
We need to keep pushing for better methodologies,
Right.
more inclusive language,
Yeah.
and greater awareness of these nuances, of
Yeah.
measuring these complex identities.
So it's about this ongoing evolution
It is.
and vigilance.
Yeah.
Both for researchers
Right.
and for us, the consumers of that research.
That's right.
Uh,
Here's a final thought to kind of leave you with.
What?
Imagine you come across a survey
Uh-huh.
about gender or sexual orientation in the news or online.
Yeah.
Knowing what you now know
Yeah.
about how these identities are measured,
Right?
will you look at those numbers with a more critical eye?
It's a powerful question.
It is.
And I really hope our listeners
I hope so, too.
will take that question to heart.
Me too.
Because ultimately, this deep dive has been about empowering you
It has.
to be more informed and discerning
Absolutely.
consumers of information.
You got it.
And to remember that behind every data point,
Yeah,
there's a human story
there is.
waiting to be understood.
Absolutely.
So true. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for having me.
Until next time, keep asking those questions.
Yes.
Keep exploring the world with curiosity and an open mind.
That's it.
Welcome back, everyone. We've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive exploring how surveys try to measure something as personal and complex as gender and sexual orientation.
We really have.
And now it's time to bring it all home.
Okay.
Why does all of this matter to us, the listeners,
Right.
the people who aren't necessarily out there designing surveys?
Yeah.
But we see these results all the time.
Absolutely.
So why is it important?
Well, we see these statistics about gender and sexual orientation in the news, on social media,
Everywhere.
maybe even at work. Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah,
But how often do we stop and think about, like, what's behind those numbers?
right. Because knowing what we know now about how these identities are measured can completely change how we interpret those findings.
It really can.
It's like we have this secret decoder ring
It is. It is.
for understanding data.
That's a great way to put it.
So, for example, you might see a headline proclaiming that, a certain percentage of the population identifies as LGBTQ+.
Right.
On the surface, that seems like a simple fact.
Uh-huh.
But we've learned that this number depends so heavily on how the question was asked, the
Totally.
language used,
Yeah.
and the social and political context in which the survey was conducted.
Yeah.
So a seemingly small change in wording or context
Right.
could have this ripple effect on the results.
Absolutely.
And this is where critical thinking is so important.
It is. Yeah.
The report encourages us to ask questions about the surveys we encounter.
Absolutely.
Like, who conducted the survey? What were the specific questions asked? Was the sample size large enough? Diverse enough?
Was it representative of the population?
Yeah, to be truly representative.
Yeah.
It's like being a detective, looking for clues
It is.
to understand the full picture.
Right?
And sometimes even seemingly reputable sources
They can.
can misinterpret or misrepresent survey data,
Unfortunately, yeah.
whether it was intentional or unintentional.
Right.
So we can't just take things at face value.
Right.
We have to dig deeper,
We do.
understand the methodology,
Understand it.
consider potential biases.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is crucial, especially
Isn't it?
when it comes to sensitive topics like gender and sexual orientation,
Right.
because even small inaccuracies
Yep.
can have real-world impacts on individuals and communities.
Absolutely. It's about making sure that data is used responsibly and that everyone is accurately represented.
Right. And the report ends on kind of a hopeful note,
It does.
pointing to the increasing inclusion of LGBTQ plus data in federal surveys,
Yeah, which is a positive sign.
which is encouraging. It means we're moving towards a more inclusive
Hopefully.
and accurate understanding of the population.
Yeah,
But the work is far from over.
it's not.
We have to keep pushing for better methodologies,
Uh-huh.
more inclusive language,
Yes.
greater awareness of the nuances of measuring these very complex identities.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process.
So it's about this ongoing evolution
Yeah, it is.
and vigilance, both for the researchers and for us, the consumers of that research.
Absolutely.
Here's something to think about.
Okay.
Imagine you come across a survey
Uh-huh.
about gender or sexual orientation,
Okay.
maybe in the news, maybe online.
Yeah.
Knowing what you now know about how these identities are measured, will you look at those numbers a little differently? Will you consider all the complexities that we talked about today? I hope so, because at the end of the day, this deep dive has been about empowering you to be a more informed, more discerning consumer of information, and to remember that behind every single data point, there's a human story waiting to be understood. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep asking those questions and keep exploring the world with curiosity and an open mind.